This is implementing WCAG, the difference between the difference collaborating with testers with disabilities makes. Basically, we did a project with Duke Health, and we had a really interesting collaboration with an accessibility testing vendor, and I thought it was worth doing a session about because I've been to a lot of accessibility sessions. It's usually follow guidelines, alt text, keyboard navigability, but there is some nuance, and so I thought there was kind of an interesting place to talk about that. So I'm going to kind of cover background on the project because this is a case study. Going to go for a super brief accessibility 101 because there are 1,000 accessibility 101 sessions out there. It's not what this is. And then I'm going to talk about how we collaborated and some of the examples of issues we ran into, where there was some gray areas or some tension between doing right by the users versus following the letter of WCAG guidelines, and then we'll go over some Q&A at the end. So kind of show of hands. First off, who here is familiar with accessibility to some degree? I think most folks probably are at this point, but we'll get into that. Is anyone responsible for a website that has accessibility compliance requirements? Cool. Are you responsible for validating your website at your organization? Yeah. And is anyone here a frequent native user of assistive technology? You see, that's why we're talking about this right there. Because that's the tension right there. So a lot of times folks that are responsible for this don't use assistive technology in their day-to-day. So I'm with DesignHammer. We're a full-service web strategy design development firm. We're in Durham. We've been doing websites since 2001. I'm a director of consulting there. So basically, I don't build websites. I do all the other stuff. So I do strategy work, SEO, analytics, usability consulting, and I kind of oversee a lot of our accessibility testing stuff. I also am not a native user of assistive technology. Worked with a variety of different organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, government, healthcare, etc. So kind of what we're going to go over is sort of what is accessibility and why does it matter? Benefits and limitations of common ways of checking accessibility. How to incorporate an accessibility partner into your workflow as a developer. It's pretty important. And then go over some gray areas on an actual project and how we worked with the vendor to do that. I'm not a Drupal developer. I think I covered that. So if you ask me Drupal questions, you will stump me. Good job. I'll cover some specific accessibility issues that we were able to address on this project. But, I'm not the accessibility guru. I'm not a native user of assistive technology, so your mileage may vary. Also, not a lawyer. No legal advice up here. So project background, we were working with Duke University, and they were looking to, they do a lot of clinical research, and they were looking to increase the participation of the community in the clinical research that they do at Duke University in Durham. Durham's kind of neat in that demographically, there's like a 30, like a one-third between kind of white African American and Hispanic. So from a research perspective, if you get everyone participating and stuff, you get a lot of value from a research perspective. So the genesis of this project was, let's have a public-facing website that connects with all of these populations. So it's a joint effort between the Office of Clinical Research and the Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute. Basically, they had a really basic clinical trials directory on the main Duke Health site. It was fed by the data that they had, and it was not user-friendly, and it did not have any of the search things that you might want to if you are actually a person and not a researcher. A lot of issues with it. So they wanted to have a separate website that had a very user-friendly directory. and also kind of built a sense of bidirectional communication with the different communities in Durham and the broader area. From a technical perspective, has a daily feeds import of study data, multilingual support, initially English and Spanish, but with the eye of maybe expanding that later. Since actually being usable was a really big component, we did user testing with actual folks who participated in clinical trials. And then accessibility was really important, again, because if what you're trying to do is get the most incidence of whatever disease it is they're trying to study in a clinical trial, so that they can actually figure out what works and what doesn't. And so, if you think about your aging population or what have you, it's important that the data be accessible, the content be accessible, so that you get people actually signing up who may have a higher incidence of the disease that you're trying to study. So Accessibility 101, there are more disabilities than just visual impairment. You've got visual impairment, which is not just blindness. It could be low vision. It could be color blindness. A lot of kind of places in between. You've got auditory disabilities, so hard of hearing or deafness. Mobility, ability includes fine motor control, cognitive disabilities, and then other or hidden disabilities. The statistic that gets thrown around is like about 20% of the U.S. has a disability of some sort, so this is not an insignificant group of people. And as we age, we will all develop disabilities. I recently said, I need reading glasses if I want to read anything once it gets dark. And that's just what it is. I did not need glasses prior to that. So accessibility is the inclusive practice of removing barriers to prevent digital interactions and access for people with unique abilities. So there's an acronym that's common in the industry. It's POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. It's kind of the guiding principles around making content accessible. So perceivable means that someone can identify content and interface elements. Operable means they can then use the controls, buttons, navigation, and other necessary elements. Understandable means they can then understand what is there. And robust means that the content is accessible through a variety of assistive technologies. So if someone's using a screen reader, that's, there are aspects of that, like being able to quickly find content, being able to have the content read aloud, being able to navigate without the use of a mouse, to be able to navigate without using visual cues to know where you're going to go. Right? And there are different usage patterns around that. If you watch someone who has low vision, smartphones are great for low vision because they can then use the smartphone to like zoom in. So like they're basically, it was fascinating to watch. They basically look at a website and say, I think what I want is around there. So they pick that spot and they zoom in, and now you have basically like one or two letters on the screen at once, and they're reading it that way. But I mean, that's their usage pattern, and if your website does not support that, it is not robust. So a couple of legal pieces. Section 508 basically is a requirement for government websites and government-funded websites to be accessible. It was originally had a specific set of guidelines that were written in law that's since been updated to be a more flexible standard, which is good. The Americans with Disability Act from 1990. Basically, that says if you are a business and you're interacting with the public, your public accommodations have to be accessible to people with disabilities. It is a little bit not 100% clear whether a website in all cases is a public accommodation. But Discretion being the better part of valor, it's best to assume that it is. So therefore, websites for businesses that interact with the public need to be accessible. A lot of institutions, nonprofits, educational institutions, whether or not they're federally funded, may have accessibility as a requirement. WCAG or WCAG or WCAG, everyone says all three, is a set of guidelines published by the World Wide Web Consortium. These are updated every so often as the web evolves, and it's basically, here is how you make content accessible. In a lot of cases, there may be some very clear guidelines, kind of black and white, you do it this way or that way, but it all adheres to the POUR acronym of perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, right? And it covers more than just visual disabilities, right? It covers all the disability types that were covered earlier. So it's a worldwide standard, and it provides a single technical standard for accessibility. So it gives a lot of examples. So how do you tell if your website is accessible? I think a lot of people are in column one. They assume or hope. Some people are like, well, I'm going to put an overlay out there so folks can do the thing and change the text size and stuff like that. Some people will say, well, I've got an automated tester, and other folks say, well, I'll go through the standards myself and manually test it. So this is a fear, uncertainty, and doubt slide, FUD. Basically, if your strategy is assume or hope, WebAIM surveyed top 1 million websites and found detectable conformance failures on almost 96% of their homepages, with an average of 56.8 errors per page. That's kind of wild. There were approximately 8,800 ADA Title III complaints against organizations in 2024, which was an increase over 2023. It had been going down a few years prior to that, but 2024 went up. And many accessibility issues are not even caused by the code of the site. They're caused by content on the site, right? So even if you've got, if you've done your job as a developer in-house or a team or whatever, content is where most of the issues are. So 56% of images aren't accessible, 93% of domains have at least one page with an inaccessible image, 64% of pages have links that aren't clear to people with disabilities, and 90% of sites have at least one page with an inaccessible link. It's wild. We don't want to assume or hope, so we're going to do an overlay. So overlays, basically, you've seen them. It's a little pop-up usually. I can then click on it, and I can say, hey, let's turn on these settings so that I have a better experience for myself. So they don't really address the underlying solution, because they may not protect you from litigation because they kind of indicate like, hey, I know about this, and I have chosen not to actually make my site accessible. I've just installed an overlay. But they actually can create usability issues for some users. If you think about it from a robustness perspective, you've now added something that could get in the way of the assistive technology someone's using. So it's actually, in some cases, going against accessibility and doesn't comply with the international guidelines for making something accessible. Limitations of automated testing. Statistics say they only find 70 to 80% of issues. I think the biggest issue, though, is that they actually require manual checking or verification to be useful, right? You take, like, we have an image, right? So it's supposed to have alt text in the image. Most of us probably know that. But that's not, like, 100% true, right? If you have an image that's a little squiggly line that's just a decorative image, that should have a blank alt text, right? So how's an automated tester going to tell you whether this is a decorative image or an image that's actually providing some sort of content? Like, it's not. So, even if you're using automated testing, there still needs to be a manual verification process. It doesn't really handle keyboard accessibility, can't really tell the logical flow. it can't really detect usability issues, but maybe can probably, can kind of apply rules effectively, but can't really figure out, is a page usable to someone with assistive technology, who uses assistive technology. So it really works best in a monitoring role, like, hey, let's scan these pages we've scanned before. These changed, let's check that out. Or, hey, we have some new pages, now we need to manually verify those, so once a website's up. Issues with naive manual testing, I put myself in that category of a naive manual tester. You can miss important issues from an accessibility or usability perspective because I am not a native user of assistive technology, right? I put VoiceOver on, I look away from my screen while I'm testing, right? But I also know what the page is because I probably put the content in there, right? So it's helpful, but it's not sufficient in a lot of cases. And then it takes more time because I don't do this day to day, day in and day out, right? And so it might result in a false sense of accessibility. So benefits of working with a team that has users with disabilities on it who use assistive technology natively. One, they can find issues that affect real people, right? So not only are they native users of assistive technology, but two, they understand the usage patterns because they use this day to day. This is how they live their lives, their digital lives, right? And also they can kind of move beyond just, does this follow the rule, but can I actually understand what's happening here? Is this usable to me? Is this informative? So that it really is, it's a big benefit around that. So for this project, we partnered with Abler. It's a mission-driven nonprofit disability inclusion consultancy. They offer a variety of services in addition to digital accessibility. They offer disability inclusion training and consulting and workforce development program. It's a spin-out from LCI Tech, which is the largest employer of the blind in the country. 70% of their team has some form of disability. Their testing team is made up of folks with visual disabilities and not, so they can kind of deal with profoundly inaccessible stuff as well. And their goal is to make digital products accessible and usable, not just compliant. So kind of looping back to Duke Health, like their goal was to ensure their outreach included individuals with disabilities, those using assistive technology. So it was very important that this project actually be accessible. So what did that process look like? So we had basically three parties in the game, right? There's DesignHammer, developer. There's Docker, the Office of Clinical Research, client, and Abler. And so, one of the things we were thinking about when we were starting out was like, okay, if we send stuff to Abler first, and then we do a back and forth on that, and we get it over to Docker, now we have a longer time frame. So if we send it to Docker, we get the client feedback, and then we send it to Abler, and then they're like, oh, this is bad, then we have to, right? So it's sort of tricky. So what we ended up doing was we delivered to both Docker, the client, and Abler at the same time, consolidated the feedback from both, advised the client of choices were appropriate, and then resubmitted the version to Abler prior to submission to the client, because that way we incorporated the feedback. We're able to actually also incorporate accessibility issues, talk about the fix necessary, and then what we're sending back to the client for approval is only stuff that's already passed Abler, but we've gotten the client looped in on making choices as appropriate. So we did that at wireframes, which is primarily around the placement of page elements, the home page. We did the directory page. We did design concepts. That's similar, but now we're looking at textures. So we're starting to get do we have sufficient color contrast? Do we have colors as being the only way of communicating information? Those sorts of things, kind of catching that ahead of time. And then we also did it with the beta candidate to kind of test the user interfaces in action, and then the final candidate for actual content. So again, that's a little bit redundant. Same, we followed the process I outlined. So kind of the single most complex part of this site was the study directory view. So it's a view, it's fed by content type, studies, and all of that content is populated nightly from a feed, it provides filters to allow users to drill down to specific studies that might apply to them. So there's got like an age filter. Does the study provide compensation? Where is the study location? Because Duke has a whole network of hospitals. So looks like that, kind of a card-based format. You've got some call to actions, passes contrast and everything, right? Right, we're good, we're done, right? Issue 1 is the DOM order doesn't match the visual order. The filter sidebar comes visually before the trials listing, but comes after the trials listing on the focus order. Well, one then the other. So that's a requirement, is that the DOM order matches the visual order from WCAG perspective. But the nuance there is the first time a user visits the page, they may wish to start on the filter controls, but the subsequent loads, they probably want to go straight to the results. So we basically added a skip link to the filters. So that, so someone probably doesn't know, like, hey, I want to filter first. They're like, oh man, now I actually want to filter, so they can skip, or they can browse. So we provided that, and that's what someone who's not visually impaired can do just natively, right? Because you can see both of those immediately. But this was a way where we had a little bit of tension with the standards as written versus what's actually usable. You notice we have 2 call to action buttons on every card, and the cards themselves, also the titles clickable, stuff like that. Multiple links with identical link text, but different destinations are present, and the purpose of each link is not clear within its programmatically determined link context, right? Super common with a card that you've got like a call to action button there, and also that you've got the title that's clickable, right? That's handy from a usability perspective, makes it easy for someone who's using their visual site to see what they're going to do. But one of the common usage patterns of someone who uses assistive technology is they're going between links. And now they have multiple links in a row that have the same destination and may even have the same link text. And these link texts are also they're the name of a clinical trial. They're super long and kind of dense, so it's not super helpful to scan those quickly auditorily. So what we ended up saying was, like, we could do this just the way it is, like just have a single link. But even that, with if we look at that, we got study details. We could make that match the name of the study. We could have just followed exactly, but now we're actually making usability worse in a lot of cases. So what we ended up doing was wrapping the cards in divs with the ARIA property labeled by set to the study ID, which provides context to the screen reader, so they could actually say, okay, this whole element that I'm about ready to interact with, it's all about this study. Now I can then say, do I want to go into this element? Cool. Or no, I want to go on to the next card. It empowers the user to do that. So that's a screenshot of that. Third issue on this was the status message is not automatically announced by the screen reader. So when you update the filter, the updated results are not announced to the screen reader. And so that's not great from a usability perspective if you're using screen reader, because you don't know, like, oh, wait a second, I've actually done something. I have 0 results. I have 100 results. So what we did So one of the things that was sort of challenging was due to just a Drupal issue. Page reload was required to apply the filters. So this took the screen reader user back to the top of the page with no context about what had been changed. And there's some reason for that, right? Because we wanted to be able to also provide a URL that goes to a pre-filtered list of items in the view, right? So it needs to be in the URL. So what we did was on submission, we changed the page title to indicate the new results have loaded and also set focus on the number of studies displayed. So, there was, like, again, all these are places where if we'd followed exactly the requirements, it would have resulted in a worse usability experience, but we were only able to figure that out by talking with testers with disabilities who actually say, well, you know what, that actually works for me, right? So it's, you know, it takes it beyond just, did we follow the rules, to did we deliver a usable website? Two other just kind of bonus accessibility gotchas. One is you need to provide two different ways to find all pages. I always forget this. That's why I put it in the slide. So if you don't have a site search, you need to provide some other way to get to all pages. Easy way is a sitemap. It can't just be through navigation. And then the other one, this was sort of an interesting one, another nuance area, is multilingual content. So we think about assistive technology with a screen reader. The screen reader is going to adjust its pronunciation based off of what language it's supposed to be reading, right? Makes sense when you think about it. I did not immediately think of that the first time this was brought up. So it's going to look at the HTML lang attribute to figure out how to pronounce the letters on this page. So Drupal has a very robust system for multilingual content. So you can have this installed. It lets you say, okay, I've now made a Spanish translation of, like, our base language for the site is English. I have a Spanish translation of this node. I have, you know, a Finnish translation of this node. You can do that, and then the system works really nicely. But in order for you to be, like, fully there, you would need to create a translation for every piece of content. Well, you know, that's one thing if you have a informational site. I mean, it's a little bit of a burden, but okay. But when you have a site that has, you know, 300 technical study descriptions, like, that becomes kind of a crazy burden. And Docker was not. They have like 2 people on staff who actually understand the science enough to be able to create Spanish translations. So it's a limited thing that they're going to do those Spanish translations. But when you think about the goal of the project, it's important that they do that, right? Because they want to connect with that community and you know, empower that community to take part in those studies. But they're not going to be able to do a Spanish translation for every single study. Just they don't have the capability to do that. So the issue is, Views also kind of understands multilingual content. But you now have an issue, right? You can either set the view to only display content that is available in the language that you have. So we set that language to Spanish, and we set that setting on the view. Now you get 12 studies out of 300. So that's not great. Or you can set the view to say, if my language is set for Spanish, display any content that's in Spanish, and then also display content that's in English if the Spanish translation isn't present. But now, that violates the accessibility requirement around that, because the page itself has content that's both in English and Spanish, but the HTML lang attribute is only for one of those. So there's no way to do everything. So in talking with Abler, basically the thing was like, well, you know, this audience is probably more used to navigating mixed language content. So the best thing that we can do from a usability perspective is present Spanish translation where available and English content as a backup. So that's what we did. So feedback was very positive and exceeded their expectations. The site's been up for, I guess, about a year and a half now, working well. The feed works well. They also have another part of the site that is basically study results, and they've got a contact form where folks can then say, hey, I think you guys should study this, because part of the goal was to make this be, we together are working on moving the needle for science, not, this institution is experimenting on you, right? So it's been very successful in that way, so that's been great. Key takeaways: automated accessibility testing is not enough. Even if you're trying to pay attention, particularly if you're not a native user of assistive technology, you can miss stuff. So, both for that reason and when you run into gray areas, which if you've got a complex website is not unreasonable that you would, working with someone who uses assistive technology natively can really help out a lot and help you figure out what's actually useful for users. So that's kind of the case study. Any questions? Yep.
Your workflow, is that for code changes, content changes, both?
So the question was, the workflow, was that for code changes, content changes, or both? So this was primarily for the initial build. It was basically design, then dev, and final delivery. If we were in a situation like their content update primarily only, they add some. Well, one, we're not responsible for maintaining accessibility. We're just responsible for delivering. And two, the content primarily is coming in from that feed. That's most of the content that changes.
Okay.
So it's a third-party data source, and in like absolute terms, if they wanted to be able to certify it, they would need to have like a vendor who's actually checking that day to day. From the institution's perspective, it was certified. If we were doing like new feature development, what we would probably do is then have effectively like, here's a new, if we did a design change, we might pull Labeler in to review that. Or we would just say, hey, here is the dev site with the new instance of stuff. Just hit this page and kind of go from there. Yep.
I thought it was interesting how early in the process it seemed like you got them involved, like back with the wireframes even. What level of content did you give to them in those wireframes, and what sort of feedback did you get back at them?
Sure. So the question was, what level of content did we give in the wireframe stage, and what feedback do we get at that point? So basically, we had sort of some dummy content that we pulled from the existing clinical directory, so we were able to have like real names and stuff like that. Ultimately, the feedback we got was was about some things to keep in mind from the user interface perspective. Some of which we had thought of, some of which, like, okay, yeah, we'll think about that. And then on the design side, it was really around color contrast and stuff like that. We didn't have anything in this case that we were trying to use color to have the green studies be the ones that have compensation or anything like that. But that's another thing that would have shown up at that point. Other things that I've seen in that sort of workflow are if there's a video kind of saying, hey, you need to have some controls here for this. Other things that can come up is if there is like a logical section, a lot of times they would be able to say, hey, you forgot to have a heading here. We need some sort of heading so that folks can navigate and jump between the different sections, because jumping between headings is another common navigation pattern. Yeah.
So in terms of like the workflow for having this accessibility testing, I imagine like, having a full accessibility testing from a team that's doing, manual would be like really expensive to have it happen, regularly. But so like, I guess how did you, as you were going through sprints and stuff, how did you scope the accessibility testing, and then were there any things that like maybe got missed and then you didn't realize like, oh, because we couldn't afford to test everything, we missed this and now we have to go back and like fix it or something later?
Yeah, so the question is like, how do you sort of chunk up what you're sending over to the testing team, during development, since, having someone go through like every page of the site every time is kind of crazy. So there are a couple different pieces of that. There's usually at least one, like in a new build, at least one big chunk where they're trying to hit all the templates. Template it's a loaded word, right? But all of the different representative pages of representative content. And so if we've got stuff like ready in one sprint, we might send over 2 or 3 templates there, like the directory, that one, that's just kind of a piece that we could chunk over the wall and they could do that. But usually it takes the longest the first time they're exposed to that layout, and then they have notes and stuff like that, and they've tracked what it is that they've previously identified, the fixes, the notes on any nuance and non-standard things that have been approved for that information. And then for like multiple instances of a similar template with different content, they will use automated testers as well, mostly to kind of grind through lots of instances. And then usually their model for a site that needs full accessibility compliance is they've got effectively like a monthly review budget, and they're just kind of chunking through the site over time based off of new pages or pages where there have been identified issues on that template in the past and stuff like that. One thing from a legal liability perspective, courts have been very, I would say reasonable is a good word. If you have that accessibility remediation process in place and someone says, this page here has a problem, courts are like, yeah, but they're going to get to it, and they're going through all the things. Versus if you're like, either, we're not doing anything, or we have kind of slapped a Band-Aid on it and walked away, which is the kind of the impression of like an overlay.
Gotcha. Another question.
Yeah, go for it.
So you mentioned a bit about some of the pitfalls of like using automated accessibility testing tools. Were you all using them anyways, just as like, as a part of the process, but then you would have this, the manual testing with as kind of like to augment that, or?
So the question was kind of prior to this, what was our use of automated testing? And we would do kind of, because automated testing is sort of there are a few different product types of that. So one, you've got sort of, like you get the WebAIM plugin for your browser. That's a form of automated testing, right? You click that on, and then it says, all right, here is some different ways you can kind of analyze this page. We would use that internally for our own accessibility QA. But the other kind of common ones are ones that crawl a whole site and basically do that for every page, or hook into like the CMS, or just read the XML sitemap and say, okay, these pages have been updated. So these need to be recrawled at a sort of a maintenance cadence. And we weren't really using a lot of that, mostly because like we just didn't contract to say that we were going to do that. It was on the table in some cases, but from a, since we're not creating the content, it's much more about us delivering that, the site that can provide content accessibly. But we also were very clear to say, we're not representing that we have done this. We will connect you with someone who can do that for you and do a good job.
So you weren't using any like automated accessibility?
Not any bulk stuff. We use like the automated in-browser stuff.
In-browser stuff,
Yeah.
okay. So like sort of ad hoc, it wasn't...
Yeah, it would be part of our QA process when we're, it's kind of an augment to our own manual review when it was contractual that we had to meet, whatever WCAG guideline, 2.1 AA or whatever it is.
Cool, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thanks y'all. I hope that was